All right, let's talk about harmony. For me, harmony is where I start. And I think it must be because I started out as a drummer. I started out playing piano, little kid, like 7 or 8 years old, taking piano lessons. Hated that the teacher made me say the names of the keys as I played them, and I quit. Continued to play piano on my own, but really started drumming and taking drum lessons and percussion lessons in middle school. So I've always been very pitch and rhythm oriented, and I think as a result, when it came down to starting to write my own music, I started with harmony. Because in my head, the harmony dictates what the melody is going to be doing, or maybe what the melody is not going to be doing. So it's all about establishing a set of rules that you sort of have your piece live in, and you can either break the rules or you can stay within the rules. And that's really, for me, more about harmony than it is about melody. I love melody, don't get me wrong. That's just not where I start. Harmony is the basis of everything that I do. And a lot of it just comes down to really modes more than anything else. And this goes really more into film scoring language than it does like classical music, ballets, programmatic kinds of things, because the modern film score uses a lot more of a basic form of modes and things than the classical composers of yesteryear did. But I thought that I could show you a piece that I wrote that really doesn't have much of a melody, and we could talk about the harmony. And it's fairly simple, but I thought maybe this would be a good place to start. Now, to be fair, this is a piece that I wrote for a demo for a Heavyocity product called Intimate Rhythms. And there's my keyboard. This was something that Heavyocity and I co-produced together. And it's strings, I think 4 players, 4 violins, 4 violas, and 4 cellos, and it's loops. But don't let that turn you off and think that just because it's loops, you can't write music that does not sound like a loop. Personally, I hate loops. I hardly ever use them, and if I do, I'm usually re-triggering them and combining them in certain ways that they don't sound like they're looping. The whole thing behind video game music that most people associate negatively with, especially in the past, is the loop. A 60-second cue plays, it loops back to the beginning, you're moving forward, and your music just keeps playing the same thing over and over. So when it comes to using loops, I'm definitely not a proponent of that. But this is a different kind of library, and before I really get into it, I'm going to play the piece and just open up a couple of things so you can see what's going on. You'll be able to hear it's very simple. We're going to go down to just our tracks that have data, and I'll kind of show you a little bit of what it does. And once we give it a listen, I'll talk really briefly about the approach of rhythmic textures and what we were trying to do when we set out to record these musicians, and then we'll break down the harmony. very simple piece. There's not a lot going on, which is why I thought it would be a good place to start in my mental approach to harmony. And I'm not a musical dictionary or anything like that, but the general idea, I studied all this stuff like a super geeky kid, even in college. I was the guy that showed up to the theory class and had already read like the entire theory book, like the summer before my freshman year. I just really love learning. So, without getting too geeky, the whole idea behind harmony in general, and the way that I think about it, is music is a story. When you're writing music, you're telling a story. When you're listening to music, you're hearing someone tell you a story. And for me, this is achieved through all kinds of things, but mostly through harmony. And if you have something super simple, let's just say you're playing a C major scale. So we've got a Western scale here. It's equal temperament and all 12 pitches are equidistant from each other, and there are overtones and things that one single note, I mean, I can hear a fifth and a major third in there. So it's, and then 2 octaves up. So the overtones in the note are kind of what determine what sounds good to our ears, which is kind of a story like I was walking down the street, it was beautiful outside, you know, a very placid sort of relaxing story, versus having a extra note in there that doesn't quite fit. It doesn't fit because it's adding a different set of overtones. And that's sort of, I was walking down the street, the sky turned black, clouds rolled in. It's all about either following the rules where you all very good, all within the major key, or not following the rules and throwing some extra things in there. So that being said, this particular piece is in A minor. Now, if we take a look at the very opening, this is kind of the motif that plays throughout the entire thing. And it's super simple. Really, all the notes are holding. This is something that I really love to do. And you've got one note that's moving. This could be classified as a passing tone, a neighboring tone, whatever you want to call it. But there's a kind of a functional inherent harmony here that's going on. And the idea is this E to D and E to F is actually outlining a chord. So you've got the A minor, and then it goes down to the D, which to me, I was thinking D minor with some sort of a pedal. And all pedal means is what you see right here, a bottom note that's not changing. Then we go back up to the E, and then to the F. Now this here isn't really a chord. It's sort of it's like an implied D minor 7, just meaning that there's a D in there, there's a minor 7 right here, and there's your 5th. When you get to this is an F major triad. So you can really hear it open up. But if I played it as actual chords without this sort of pedal from the A and the C, it would sound a lot different. You'd get kind of this and to me that's too much too soon. That's like, I was walking down the street, the sky was blue, there were birds everywhere, and everything's like an exclamation point. And for the beginning, especially with a piece that I want to kind of have an arc, swell up and then go back down at the very end, I wanted to start simple. So the idea of just having that one note moving, there's only one thing going on. Here's your story. Right there. And it really makes it simple, which I think is good, but is also really hard to do. Having anything simple and having the courage and the gumption to put something really simple out there and say, this is me and it's very simple and I'm okay with it because I'm going to build on it and I'm making a statement now that's going to pay off later. I don't want to hit them with everything at the very beginning for this particular piece because that's just not the kind of piece that it was. And you know what? I've already gotten so much further ahead than I wanted because I wanted to talk about the library itself a little bit. Rhythmic Textures, Heavyocity. So like I said, we co-produced it, and the idea was to come up with all different kinds of interesting sounds that string players could make that were tempo synced and only on a single note. So it almost sounds like, well, how many different variations of just a single note that's playing rhythmically can you do? Well, it turns out you can do a lot. One of the things that I really loved, which right here is the very first patch that I started with, Rhythm Soup. And if I just hold down a single note, that's not the piano. So there's this great function in Cubase, a command, enable record on selected MIDI track. And usually that's what I have featured. So when I click on something, you can see the record button is changing with it. But if I wanted to, for example, be able to play the piano and pull up something, so if I pull this up, it's recording it automatically for me, which is how I normally work, and that's great. But I can deactivate that, so then if I wanted to, I could have the piano record enabled and I could pull other things up. And this is counterintuitive to the way I normally work, so apologies up front. So here we go. Rhythm Soup. Here's a single note. Now, if I did my job correctly, this is one of the articulations I came up with, and it's my favorite one because it's so simple, but it goes and does so much. The tempo is right about there, about 120 BPM. But if you listen to the pulsing in that patch, it's kind of all over the place, but in a consistent way. And as it just so happens, I know the guy that did these charts. So here is Rhythm Soup. And all it is 2 against 3. And this is the whole score. We had the violins and the violas and the cellos all record separately, but the idea is they're playing the same thing. So we've got 2 violins on triplets going boop bop boop bop boop bop boop bop boop bop, playing offbeat quarter note triplets, while the other 2 violins are just doing up and down small arcs on steady eighth notes. Now I should still be holding in record that patch, so let me hold down the key and see if it works. I love that because the bows are constantly moving and you have that sense of motion without it getting in the way too much. You could play all kinds of chords, like 2 octaves of. And it's just this gorgeous string sound. So that was the beginning. That was one of the first things that I thought about doing. And another one that's featured here that I will show you the score for is this guy. And there was the loop. Another thing that I really wanted to do, and I got to admit, Heavyocity did all the heavy lifting for me on this. I won't blather on about how much I love those guys and how I've known them forever, and I'm just so amazed and privileged to call them friends as well as colleagues and co-producers or whatever it is we do together. We're basically just one big happy family, and ideas come out and we get to do things, and it's not a I did or they did. We really do all this stuff together. And they're really good about saying, well, sure, let's try that. So with loops, one of the things that's always bugged me is either a 1-bar, oh heaven forbid, a 2-bar or a 4-bar loop. And with this particular library, I wanted to do an 8-bar loop. And it's a very subtle 8 bars. Basically, the last bar of the 8-bar loop is just different from the 4th bar of the 8-bar loop. So kind of the end of the 4-bar phrase is different. So if you're looping it, you have the psychological, subconscious sense of it's not a loop because it doesn't repeat every 4 bars. Now that I've got that little geeky side out of the way of how we went and did the library, we can talk about some chords. And you know, it's tricky because this piece, a lot of times, most of the time actually, when I'm writing music for a project, I have chords in the chord track on Cubase. And I love that it has a chord track because I did that with markers, I think, in Digital Performer, and it worked fine until I needed to change the key up a whole step or down a half step or even up a fourth or something like that, just because of its relative nature to other cues maybe. And then all of my chords were off, which the day of wasn't a big deal, but if I pulled it up and I needed to add something or change something, it's just so much faster if you have the chords written. And Cubase's chord track will transpose, which is just brilliant. You just literally select them, select a different root note, and everything changes. So I don't have a chord track on this particular piece because it's literally just something I did as a demo, spent a couple of hours on it. There's no external anything. Everything I have here is loaded as independent contact instruments. So, you know, trem, swell is literally just trem, swell, and that's it. That's the only thing I have on there. It's all synced externally. No additional reverb, no additional EQ, no additional anything. And again, if I expanded out, it's literally just the 16 different articulations for each violins, violas, and cellos. And I just had them there so that I could kind of, you know, just scroll down and audition them and choose the ones I wanted. But this was the first one I listened to, and I think I literally did this. Which is me playing the keyboard and moving the mod wheel a little bit. But that's what that is. And it was already at 120 BPM, and I thought, that sounds kind of neat. Maybe I'll just record that. And then I went, and that's why there's no chords. But maybe for all of our own sake, just to keep up with everything, we'll do chords, just so that we have an idea of where we're going and what we're working on. And a lot of times, I will not notate these individual little motion bits because that's just sort of a passing tone. There's an implied chord, but you know, nothing worth writing home about. Plus, if I can hear that, I can tell you that that's I can tell that's A minor to F major, so it's nothing that's too complicated. So maybe the best thing to do would be to look at this one section at a time. So we already talked about these little individual notes and how I kind of think of a pedal. I love pedals. I love having a note sustained through a chord that maybe isn't supposed to be there, but it was playing beforehand. So you kind of have an excuse to let it linger, especially if it's going to move somewhere else, or in anticipation of some kind where there's a note that comes in with the chord and it's not supposed to be there, but it holds over, and when the next chord comes in, it makes sense. And we resolve to a nice G right here, which is basically the whole point of this pedal, is for these two notes to resolve down to these two notes. And this is just violas, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, violas playing a slightly different patch an octave down. And from a harmony standpoint, basically we're in A minor, down to the D, back up to the E, and you get that F. open this one. And then it goes to the E. So see, I have to turn that off because I just want to be able to play my piano. It goes back down to the E, and then the D, and you've got, see that A and C sitting there, and all they do is go down to the G. So the D in this way is sort of anticipating that G. And this is what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. It's a 14-bar phrase. Have I mentioned that I don't like loops? And I think phrasing, especially like 8-bar phrases, definitely has its place if you want things to feel comforting and you want to be reassured in sort of the back and forth of an 8-bar phrase. I think that's great. A lot of times I'll intentionally not do that, and I'll make it a 10-bar phrase or a 12-bar phrase just because it sounds and feels, I think, more stream of conscious and more conscience, stream of conscience. And it feels a little more musical. It's telling a little bit more of a story. And that would explain these 4 chords here as well. It's just going from A and then that rising note with the F. Just a very simple way of kind of going back and forth. It's like it's an F over A. Implied, basically. But we'll do that just so that we have an idea. Now what I do like, this is where the cello comes in. So we can look at our chords. This is the first time we hear a note that low. So literally, we're doing this, but the bass is doing something completely different. Not counterintuitive to the chords, a different sort of line. And that's probably, if harmony is the #1 thing that I think of when I'm trying to tell a story musically, then the bass is #2, if not right up there with #1, because there's a really big difference between an A minor chord that sounds like this and an A minor chord that sounds like this. The third in the bass is a very, very powerful thing, and so is the fifth for that matter. And why is that? It all goes back to those overtones. When you have the root, the original, the first note, A in the bass, it's reinforcing all the overtones you're hearing at the top. When you put a C in the bass, I just love that so much. But it's saying it wants to go somewhere. The story is not finished. There's something transitioning, there's something going on. So if you think of that motion we had, and now we're hearing it for a second time. We're sort of on this C section, I suppose. But the bass is going down. So you've got the A minor, then you have an F implied, but it's actually over F, so we're going to have to change that chord. Then it goes back to A minor, but there's an E. Then we go back to F, but there's a C. And I don't know if any of the astute among you noticed, but we've got a major third jump here and a major third jump here. So it's kind of a nice and then we go back to the A in the next section. So let me play this right here. So it's like the journey is not finished yet. And what did we say this was? This is great because if I double click on it, I can play an A minor chord and then play an E, A minor over E. You can type it in as well. But what this allows me to do, if I look at the chords immediately, I know my bass is going A, F, E, C. This one might require a bigger view. Let's see. Oh, well, one of the things we need to do is show tracks with data so that I'm not losing my mind trying to keep track of everything. Now I can see already E, D, E, F, E, D. This is the same shape that we had before, and I promise you, what I probably did was I copied and pasted it. I already have my controller data drawn, I like the shape of the phrase, and what I'm doing is building on that harmonic structure and just adding more stuff on top. This is the line that's added on top, because if you notice, these are exactly the same as they were in the previous phrase. So maybe you could call that a melody. This piece isn't really about writing a melody. Honestly, this library isn't about playing melodies. And music these days, a lot of time a melody quantifies as whatever the top voice of the chord is. If you're just doing chords and well, then you've heard. Your ear thinks that's the melody because it's what's on top, which is totally fine. This is not a melody-driven piece, which is why we're talking about harmony. But this particular line right here has that nice kind of, are we in A? So literally, I was just playing these four voices right here. And I only jumped up to that C because I like the idea of it sounding like it needed to resolve somewhere. And where it resolves is actually way back here when we finally get to this G chord. This whole thing is just me noodling and building up to resolving down to G. So this is like a fake resolution to G, because if I were playing this chord, now you've got a perfect G triad. But that's not what I'm playing, because the A and the C are still pedaling. So instead you've got completely unresolved, because we're only 4 bars in. We don't want to resolve it until way down here. And then this little nice lift up, the half step up to the F, always works really well. And then it's just a matter of kind of starting high, working our way down, and resolving quietly. And you can even see the way the phrase dynamics work. Here's another example of 8 bars. Pay no attention to this. So we've got 4 bars here and 4 bars here, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bars. Why? Why not? Extending phrases and shortening phrases too, having a 3-bar phrase to gain tension and momentum is a great way to kind of put the listener on edge, even though they don't realize it. This is not that kind of a piece. This is it's slightly sad and inspiringly depressing maybe, but it's very quiet and things just get a little more drawn out as opposed to speeding up. So literally you've got a 4-bar phrase here, 2 more bars. This is the exact same thing as this is right here, except it finally resolves down to the G. And it's really just a matter of those A and C. And then finally, these two guys go down here, which is just a flat major 7 chord, and it exists in the key and everything's hunky-dory. So let's play from here. And of course there was a cello line as well that was playing E to D. So if I include that just in one of these, you can see how the voicing worked out. And even though it resolves to G, the bass so we're resolving like this. The D is in the bass, which is the 5th, as opposed to resolving like this with the root in the bass. You see how final and fully resolved that sounds? There's a reason. The 5th is in the bass here, and then the 5th is in the bass here. So we're still, there hasn't been a real resolution, and we're 1 minute and 10 seconds in, and nothing's really resolved yet. There's still a Tory. I can't help it. I get so excited. If I start talking about bass lines and resolutions and chord progressions, I fumble and stumble across my own brain, so apologies. But it does get a lot more straightforward after this, because we're literally just sitting on an A, and the resolution that you do get is a big fat resolution to A. And again, a little bit of motion right here. And these patches, this is a super cool one. And this is what I love about Heavyocity. Not only do we get the organic, natural recordings of these amazingly well performed and recorded string players, thank you Satoshi for the recording, we also get these wonderful hybrid sort of sounds. Now, I worked on the front end with the parts and the concept and worked with Heavyocity to get everything ready for the recording session. They did all the back end stuff with making the loops and putting everything into the sample player, and especially coming up with these wonderful hybrid sounds. So that sound, it sounds like there's some Colenio in there that we recorded, but also some bows, and it's just a great kind of synth sort of sound that within context here, at least to my ears, sounds completely natural. This is another thing that I really love to do in terms of motion. If you're just sitting on a particular chord and you don't want to do the dramatic storytelling, you just want to let the listeners know that you're still moving forward. Something as simple as this, going down, then starting back on the E and going back up. So there's what, a 4-bar intro, and then here's a 8-bar phrase and another 8-bar phrase. And all it really is, look at that, I'm starting to get used to it. I'm going to play so you can just hear this, these, 10 bars. I'm going to go through it pretty quickly because it's simple. But you've just got the A's, then there's an E. And now where have we heard that before? But before it went back up to E and then up to F. This time we go and what you want is you want to hear it resolve down to the A, but it doesn't. It goes back up to the E and this time goes up. And it does resolve there, so we actually get some resolution at 55. And my guess is going to be at 55, can I find one? Yep, there's an F. So 55 is the first time we hit the F. And I promise you that that is an F an F chord over F. F over F. Everything else is really more or less just motion. There's our A, and then it goes to F. And then we go back, we're doing the same stepwise up to the scale, stepwise up to the scale, and I see that right there, and I know that's an extended 5 suspension resolution, which is another thing that I love to do. But let's pause and just do these bars right here, which is basically sitting on A for a good probably 20 seconds, feeling like we're going somewhere though, and then resolving to F. So when we come back and we're still doing A with the same thing here, as we have right here, it feels like it's new and it's going somewhere else. We're going to stop when we get to this A. Now when we go back to the A, you really feel like we've concluded a phrase. And some of the other just simple kinds of ideas here. Let me get this whole thing here in one picture if we can. Octave, 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 root, root, one tiny bit that starts out as a root and then does some parallel motion with everything else. And I'll play that for you real quick. I wanted to have a reason for this C to be here, because if it wasn't, you would have Fs and As, and that's it. And it would be hard to tell if it's Fs and As. Is it D minor? Because we've done that before, or is it actually F major? And in order to have that C there, and I wanted it voiced that way, I didn't want it to just jump in. I wanted to work my way up to it. And it works well because this is the beginning, and it's simple, and then we get bigger, a couple of octaves, and a little bit of harmony in here. And then we play the same thing again, E, F, G, A, E, F, G, A. It's the same thing, but we've finally come to the point where we're going to harmonize it completely and not have funky notes in the bass. The chords and the bass note are following each other. So it goes from A to D to C to E. Really, this is the same chord progression. It's the same chord movement, I should say, because we end on an F here, we end on an E there. But the movement is the same. It's more implied harmony because we're pedaling over A. And then here's when we start really, really moving. And to be fair, I'm orchestrating in terms of the way the strings are arranged. It's slightly different than the way I would do it if I was writing for a live string ensemble, or if I was writing not for this particular library, if it was cinematic studio strings or even the regular Novo strings. I would be orchestrating it differently because a lot of the doublings and things that I have here are to accentuate different patches, different rhythms that are being played. Sometimes it'll be the same octave with violins and violas, but they're playing two different patches because I wanted that kind of timbre. So it's a good starting point for the spacing of the string voices and how they work, but not necessarily like a de facto example of how I would write if I were writing for traditional orchestra. I just wanted to sort of throw that out there. But the general idea is strings do work really well when they're spaced apart like this. And if I had a triad fulfillment here. Like if this was going to be A minor, and I put a C here, and then this is going to be F major, and I kept the C there, and then having this space is really nice. A lot of times that major, or this is a perfect fifth, but that major or minor sixth and perfect fifth space works really well. And if this were a traditional orchestration, these would be the first violins, these would be the second violins, and these would be the violas. Then we'd have cellos, probably divisi, and very nice space. So it's kind of like A minor, A minor, A minor, A minor, and then we get to here, which you see, we're almost to the end of the piece. It resolves here at 67. So if this is at 2 minutes and 10 seconds, we're finally getting our chord payoff at 1 minute and 50 seconds. So the whole idea is it's been 1 minute and 50 seconds of build-up and storytelling, and the big reveal is kind of coming at the end. So it's all been these suspensions and pedal points and only a little bit of the root in the bass here and there kind of hinting at what was going on. We can look at these chords a little closer, and I can tell you that we're going from A minor to D minor to C major and then an E suspension. And I'll plug this in real quick. So that's our harmonic movement. And the reason I'm doing this, like everything else that I've done, this will be available to download either as the Cubase file, or if you don't have Cubase, as a MIDI file, so you can grab it and look at it and do anything you want with it. And even better, if you have the Rhythmic Textures Heavyocity instrument, it'll play exactly the way I'm doing it now, because like I said, there's nothing additional on this, no additional processing or anything like that. And you also have a great template to start with all of your things opened up if you want to have, 64 instances of Contact or whatever I've got going on here. But this is it. We've basically arrived at the finale, as much of a finale as a piece like this can have. Root position chords, and then this is the first and only time we hear a suspended E to a major. And that's the big 5 chord. That's if you're in A minor. The biggest thing that wants to go back to A is the 5 and E. That's like the super classical version of wrapping it up. Now you see that there's no F here at all. As a matter of fact, we're a half step apart from the F and the E. And that's just a matter of kind of choosing your modes and picking where you want to have that major 5 chord. Naturally occurring in like a just Aeolian, and as I said before, I'm not going to get super geeky, but a natural minor scale, like an Aeolian minor, it's got that G. Let me switch back here so you can see it. G natural. Which means if you're playing a G chord, you've got a nice major. When you go to E, it's actually a minor, and that sounds very sad. Could you tell how sad that was? So a trick, and I loved it in Amadeus, which is an amazing movie. If you haven't watched it, for shame, go watch it right now. There's so many great musical things in there, but they're in, is he in D or is he in G? I think he's in G, and he's, it's at the, I won't even say anything. So he's dictating. Let's just pretend that he's in A minor. And he's dictating, going, A and this, and then we're going to go to an A chord, and then we're going to have a C chord. And he says, and then now at the end, an E chord, which if you're in A minor, an E chord naturally occurring is minor, meaning a G natural, not a G sharp, which means it's major. So he says, and an E chord, and the person taking the dictation says G sharp, and he goes, of course, like he's super annoyed. Now that wasn't the chord in the movie, but the idea is, of course it's a G sharp, because it's a 5 chord, and the 5 chord is going to be major at the end of a phrase especially. Now yes, you could have, go back to the keyboard view, you could have something that maybe does A minor to G to D minor and does a resolution but wow, it's such a downbeat resolution, isn't it? It's like, oh, it's just a real big downer. Having that major pop in there, especially if you haven't done it before. You don't even have to have the third and the final chord. You just go to A. I just played an open fifth basically with an extra A in the bass, and without implying the minor, it just sounds a lot happier. And a lot of this I think has to do with kind of implication, what you intend, and letting the listener fill in some holes. Now if you were being super classical and playing A minor, E major, A minor, very classical, because that major 5 is like the staple. If you're in minor, you always have a major 5 no matter what in classical music. Now in film scores, anything from John Williams to Hans Zimmer to anybody, a lot of times the 5 is minor unless they want to really make a statement either about a resolution where they make it major and it goes back to 1, or they'll actually have it resolve on the 5 with the suspension. Back to the keyboard again. And then they go somewhere else with it. You know, maybe it's a deceptive cadence and they go. You can go anywhere. But having that 5 chord and using it sparingly, if that's your intent, if that's the kind of story you want to tell, really goes a long way. And something else to be said right here for this D minor, and we'll wrap this up soon. It's going a little longer than I expected, but I can't help it. I just get excited about harmonies. So A minor to D minor, that's also a very sad sort of thing, because you have again, Aeolian. A lot of times if I'm writing minor, I write in Dorian, which means that the 4 is major instead of minor. And all that means is instead of that sad sort of sound, you get this. Which is a lot more uplifting and hopeful, but still minor because you're in minor. We'll probably do an episode about modes and the differences and everything else. But for this particular piece, I wanted it to be introspective and kind of a little sorrowful, and the D minor, the minor 4 chord, I thought really worked for that, especially since it's implied before that, and we really only hear it in its true form with the D and the A down here in the bass, with the minor 3rd here at the very, very end, and then all the other chords are major. So why don't I play it from here? And by the way, when we get to this, it's the same E to D to E to F that's at the very, very beginning, just slightly different orchestration. So knowing all of that, applying all the knowledge that you just learned, let's take a look at those chords again. These are muted, and I'm assuming that means I didn't want them to play, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete them. So pay attention to the way that this harmony feels, especially when we're pedaling here, and it's sort of moving, but not in the bottom. And then when this hits F, and you've got this big open chord with the Fs here, and then there's a C way up here, that's your only C. then we get to the section, if you notice, there's a little bit of contrapuntal motion going on right here, which basically means the top and the bottom are going in opposite directions. That's why those notes were muted, by the way. Let me hit undo. See, they still would be doing it, but I wanted it to be more dramatic. So they're going contrary to each other, with big jumps here, and then a resolution down, and the bass has big jumps down with a resolution up. This is also the only time that the root is existing with the fifth on all three counts, if I include that guy right there. Even if you go back to the beginning, we had a root and fifth relationship. I believe it was here, but the root was on top and the fifth was in the bass. And there's some other things that, you know, if we wanted to make this a 3-hour symposium, I could keep talking, but there's some other things that I did. This is why I encourage you to download the MIDI file or the Cubase file and take a look at everything. Outside of just orchestration and voicing for the strings, a lot of times I have something else coming in all the time. I guess not a lot of times. All the time, I have something else coming in, all the time. At the end of a phrase, whether it's 10 bars or 8 bars, something else is coming in and changing, even if it's subtle. And you can see that even in the case right here, with this, 8 and then 6 bar phrase, a few things stay the same, but 2 other things change. And those are two completely different sounds. And same thing here. We've got this phrase, and then something comes in here, something comes in there, that drops out. It's all about keeping the listener engaged on an aural level and kind of guiding their ear different places. So the harmony and the bass and inversions in the bass and contrapuntal movement and everything is all great, but if you're doing the same instruments, and in this case I'm almost using these patch changes as different instruments. If you're doing the same instruments or the same patches for the entire thing, no amount of interesting harmony or anything is going to keep people's ears engaged. It's changing the registers, changing the instruments themselves or the patches at the end of a phrase, helping things build and come back down, helping tell the story, using all these different tools together at the same time. And at the end, really all we have, that's our, I'm not looking at the right thing, so that's our suspension and resolution. Here we go. And then at the end, this is what I meant to do. You recognize that, because it's the exact same thing as the beginning. A very sort of bookendy kind of thing, which I really love doing. So we've got our chord progressions in there, we've got all of our chords marked in Cubase, and I think more or less I've covered everything. I hope this was helpful. It ended up being close to an hour, which was not my plan. I wanted it to be more like 30 minutes. But this was basically my attempt at doing a deconstruction of music, and in the future I'll be doing specific games and projects. So we'll go through Dead Space or Far Cry Primal or Evolve or Tomb Raider and do the exact same thing and hopefully not make it twice as long. So thanks for sticking with me, and we're all wrapped up, and you know what that means.